All right, so we are going to do a panel discussion. Tomorrow we're going to ask life advice questions, but today so text those in as you get a chance, your trickiest life advice question, and I will moderate these good men. But tonight I'll select from a few of the questions we've already received, but I also have a few that Pastor Michael and I prepared. And the first one, come on in, filter in, I'll talk slowly. The first one is this, gentlemen. Pastor Michael and I both grew up in the more squishy evangelical world with a bit of egalitarianism, even in supposedly complementarian churches. And so we're used to dealing with one kind of problem, which is households that are not at all patriarchal and should be. But we've been talking recently about how we're well aware that now, as we express and prioritize these things, we're going to be attracting potentially different kinds of households. And so just candidly, we've had at least, I've heard just in the past couple of days of a household in our orbit where mom couldn't go shopping unless dad went with her or greenlit it. We had a young woman who was a part of our church recently who they were never a part of a church growing up. Dad was the pastor. All 6 or 7 or 8 kids or whatever just got all their discipleship from dad. That young woman ran away, wanted nothing to do with her dad or their family. And so how would you counsel some of these men here who are first-generation patriarchs and these women who are first-generation matriarchs to avoid that sort of ham-fisted, graceless way of doing what the Bible commends? Yes, I'm sorry. Let's introduce ourselves. That's why you're the lead pastor. And I am whatever my job title is that I forget. All right, let's go around and introduce yourselves, and then we'll...
I'm Toby Sumpter, pastor at King's Cross Church in Moscow, Idaho.
Joe Rigney, I'm a professor at New St. Andrews in Moscow, Idaho.
Matt McBee, pastor at Christ the Lord Church, an hour north of here in Dayton, Ohio.
Shane Morris, I'm a writer and podcaster with the Colson Center for Christian Worldview.
I'm Michael Clary, and I met you all last session.
I'm just going to go ahead and say Shane clearly has like the best AM radio voice right there. It's a deep, clear baritone voice. All right, so how do we avoid that ham-fisted, graceless sort of way of applying these things?
So I'll jump in. I think first thing is to realize that headship, as we think about it patriarchally, is first and foremost about a man's presence and not his ability to bark orders. So a head orders, structures, organizes his household for the mission, first and foremost by his presence, and then out of his presence comes words and actions and so forth. And oftentimes in the kind of petty tyranny that you're talking about, where a guy gets the patriarchal Jim Jams and wants to squash everything, what he's doing is he lacks presence. By presence, I mean something like gravitas, and it needs to be a glad gravitas. It needs to be, there's a gravity and there's a gladness, there's joy. That is the thing that actually people are following, and the words and the deeds are flowing from it. And typically in a situation like that, lacking the gravity, he's trying to compensate for it by rules, right? By micromanaging. So that's one thing. The second thing has to do with thinking about the body side of it, the wife. And there's just kind of an insufficient understanding of like what, the Proverbs 31 woman. I love this. Chris Wiley talks about this in his stuff on productive household. He's like, if you took the Proverbs 31 woman out of the, BC, 2,000, 3,000 years ago, and you plopped her into the present day, she would be the vice president of a mid-sized corporation. Like if you actually read what she does, right? I mean, okay, so this is a queen, but it's a royal household, not just but kings and queens, right? But she's overseeing maidservants. She's a real estate agent, right? She's considering fields and buying them. She's bringing goods from afar. She's turning things, she's collecting, raw materials in order to, make into clothing for her household and for others. She sends her goods to market. She's exercising substantial authority in this household under her husband's leadership. He's out at the city gates, right? He's representing the household to other households and into the wider polity. So he's the head, he's representing, but he's delegated substantial authority to her. She's the household, oikodespotes in the New Testament. She's the household tyrant, household manager, sorry. She's the household manager, and she has substantial authority in her sphere. So if a husband feels like he has to micromanage, right, then it's a sign that he's the heart of her husband does not trust in her. He's not doing Proverbs 31. He's doing some other thing.
I also mentioned one of the things that we talk a lot about in Moscow is the fact that all earthly authority, so no earthly authority is absolute. Only Jesus has absolute authority. All other authority on earth is given by him. So all legitimate earthly authority, and this applies to all the spheres. So this is why this is the grounds upon which we can object to tyrannical civil authorities, because they got their authority from Jesus. We can object to tyrannical ecclesiastical authority, pastors, elders misusing their authority, because they're under Jesus. And the same thing goes for a father or a husband. So all authority, all earthly authorities, is limited and delegated authority from Jesus, which means it's real, it's true authority, but they have a boss. So one of the questions we frequently, questions, but one of the things we frequently tell women who are looking for a husband, one of the early questions you want to be looking for answers to is, so who do you submit to? Who are you in submission to? In this world, everyone is in submission to various authorities. I'm in submission to my session of elders. I'm in submission to the civil authorities that are in my town and more broadly. So there's a man who has no authority over him is a man you should not trust.
I want to say something about I think the context that makes this question so common and urgent, and that is the fact that there is no context, right? So we're trying to build an authority structure de novo from the ground up without any supporting scaffolding around it socially, and that's extraordinarily hard. And I think it's fair to just point that out at the beginning and say, let's give extra grace to the families who are trying to figure all that out, because you can read books like Mary Eberstadt's How the West Really Lost God, and one of the points that she makes in there is that the church itself is part of the historic scaffolding which has held up marriage, which has made marriage a plausible way of life. And if you try to go out there and do this sort of Lone Ranger thing where you create a marriage out of thin air and try to be a patriarch, a first generation patriarch, without having that supporting scaffolding around you, you're going to be fighting every single step of the way, in the same way that you'd be fighting to, establish a family without the church around you, as Eberstadt talks about. So there's a lot of difficulty there, and I think that's where the temptation comes from, to be that sort of ham-fisted tyrant and try to rule with your fist instead of with your. I'm not talking about abuse. I'm talking about like emotionally and spiritually and authoritatively to be that tyrant, or for a woman to be a sort of doormat. And I think men are also driven in this direction by, additionally, the suspicion, which is in some sense grounded, that there are forces continually speaking into that marriage, trying to corrupt it, trying to undermine, trying to subvert the allegiance that you talked about, Toby, that the wife and the children should have to the husband and father. And so he's always suspicious about that. Now, all of this is not to be like doom and gloom and you can't possibly do it. It's to say that humans are virtuous in contexts. Almost no one that you admire in history, in the Bible, was the way they were just because they stood up as a lone pillar. There's this picture I saw recently of it was a tree out west, and there was all this clear cutting that took place in this old grove forest, and it wasn't one of the sequoias, but it was some large species of redwood, and this one tree had been left for whatever reason, and there's doubt as to whether this beautiful, magnificent 300-foot tree is going to last for very long, because it doesn't have the supporting root structure of the forest that used to exist around it. And I think that's where we find ourselves today. We're those lone trees. So a lot of grace, a lot of prayer. God can build from scratch, but we need to try to rebuild the forest, not just individual households.
So I guess to that same sort of idea, a lot of us do not have, I'm fortunate enough, Pastor Michael told the story of my father, but that is the minority, where you have a patriarch ahead of you. So what do we do if our parents, our kids' grandparents, are totally unfamiliar with patriarchalism, are totally unfamiliar with, why are you going to homeschool your kids? You want to be weird? You want my grandkids to be weird? What do we do? How do we, if we don't have support behind us generationally, how do we navigate that?
One of the things that, sorry, were you going to go? One of the things that Doug's dad, Jim Wilson, who was a faithful, he came to the Lord in the Navy, the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, back in the day, and then was faithful for many years and is really a big part of what is going on in Moscow. But one of the things he emphasized for many, many years was the fact that, he taught that generational faithfulness, the blessings of generations that the Bible talks about, it flows actually in both directions. So I think we often think of that it just has to start with us. But one of the things he pointed out was that it's actually the honor of father and mother that's the first commandment with the blessing. So he says, if you want to be blessed in the land and you want your children to be blessed, start by looking back upstream and honor your father and mother. And so this is one, like his most famous booklet that's been translated and spread all over the world is a little booklet called How to Be Free from Bitterness. And it's just an extraordinary booklet with just short essays. But the central piece of it is recognizing that in his ministry, one of the key things he saw over and over again was people who find themselves in situations, oftentimes due to the sins of their fathers and their mothers. And then the temptation is to be bitter. And he said, and basically that's a great way to make sure that the next generation gets it again. But if you actually want to see that start by getting right with your parents as best as you can. And so that'd be one answer, would be, it's broken. Okay, well then start honoring them as best you can. Try to be reconciled to your stepdad or anybody that you possibly can. And I know there's some really horrific, sometimes situations where it's not possible. But as much as it's possible, try to be reconciled, at least be free from bitterness. Have honor for them in your heart, at the very least, so that that blessing, the first commandment with the blessing, can begin to flow down. That would be one key thing.
A pastor here and I tonight were just talking about how much we love that book. Travis Mills has a copy for you, a nicer one than the one I gave you.
To use a metaphor you used, but in a different way, the idea of keeping the Lord in your peripheral, versus your focus. But to use that metaphor in this situation, as we push to look generationally, and that guy you're talking about who can't look back, but you want to look forward, it's easy. Like we want to always keep that vision in our peripheral. But I just want to encourage the guy to just make the faithful decision that's in front of you right now. You, with the Lord, with the counsel that God's put around you, the word, the pastors that are with you, that are walking in your midst, and just make the mundane, faithful decision right now. But keep that in the peripheral of your vision. Where are we headed, and where did I come from? And those are all good. But I think it's easy for us to get potentially overwhelmed. I don't have all of that, and I want all this. But God's called us to be faithful today, and He's got tomorrow. We can trust Him.
And in cases where the husband is in the wrong it's helpful, ladies, to remind him of how frustrated he is when his authority figures treat him unfairly, his boss or maybe his pastor or something along that lines. And then
I like how you looked at Michael right there.
And then here's a play that I've run on my wife, and I'll give you this for free. In the circumstances where I think she is in the wrong, I will remind her how deeply frustrating it is when the kids do not listen to her and make her life difficult and fail to get on the same page with her and the team with her. And I just say, isn't that frustrating? And she goes, yeah, it is frustrating. So it's a mutual thing. You can use that on each other.
I was just going to add another thought. This actually tees off of something that Shane, you said a minute ago about needing community. So I think this is one of the things that God really revealed in the sort of whole COVID insanity, which I think one of the plays that got run on us is over many decades, really, the left and those who hate the Lord have made us believe that we're relatively isolated. And in the middle of that crisis, I think God sort of shook things and everybody realized, where are my people? And so there's been a lot of people running, saying, okay, and maybe some people it shook and you said, okay, we've got one another, we're good. And then there's other people streaming to you, or maybe you realized I'm all alone, I need to go find those people. But the covenant community, the people of God, is that old growth forest. And like finding those people, don't do it on your own, don't be alone. But that's also true in terms of seeing all the patterns, seeing like you don't have a dad who did it right. Jesus says in the Gospels that anyone who gave up father, mother, sister, brother, children, houses, lands for my sake will receive in this life houses, lands, fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, and persecutions, and in the life to come, eternal life. And I think he's talking about the church. That he gives that back to us in the church. So you may not have your own father, but you have a bunch of fathers in the church. You may not have a mother, but you have a bunch of mothers in the church.
I'll add something to that. I had a point that I cut out of my notes, so it's fortuitous that it came up here, because this was one of the points is that you've got to find people, like a support structure around you to live this out. Because if you're a first-generation patriarch, you don't have mom and dad to look to and say, call up your dad. It's like, Dad, how do I resolve this? Or Mom, what did you do in this situation? Because you're starting from scratch without any support, and so it is important to find a supportive community. So like we've got a homeschool co-op here, so the ladies in our church that are homeschooling can find support from one another, can share notes, and get the kids together. There's fellowship with the kids. There is a family in our church that just take my word for it, just exudes godliness and in their demeanor, the children, the household, everything about them. They're just a wonderful, humble, godly family, and they've sacrificed greatly to trust God for the children He's given them. I think they have 8, and they're persecuted by his parents. And it is a deep wound for him, because he is doing everything he can to obey God. And they're like, another kid? What's the matter with you people? Like, you can't afford the ones you got. What's the matter? And they really make it difficult. So he is needed to find a tribe that will support him. And he has found that with our church here, of other people that could be like we're here for you. We will support you. And the church can supplement what is often going to be lacking, because in the days ahead, more patriarchs will be first generation, because it is to the fact that there is a momentum behind it. It is a momentum in that it is a new thing that does not have a lot of precedent in a lot of our lives. So we're going to have to be relying on one another in the body of Christ to find examples and role models.
How do I be the kind of dad where my kids at 30 years old want to come home and spend the holidays with me? And same question, Mom.
Joyful.
What's the difference between joy and just being goofy? I would actually say goofy is really important. I mean it. So
Tickle fights.
Well, yeah, that's right.
At 30.
So playfulness matters in that question. Playfulness is a sign of health in a community. So because it's a sign of trust, security, humility, and so if you're in a home where everything's always serious, then they're not going to come home, right? If everything's always deadly serious, if there's always an edge, and so a big part of what godly husbands are trying to cultivate is an atmosphere of playfulness in their home. They need to laugh with their kids. They need to laugh with their wife. They need the kids to see them laugh with the wife. Like all of those things, family that plays together stays together, kind of thing. And I think because that's a part of gravity. So you can't force people to do it. You've got to create a certain kind of environment that draws, that pulls. You're not going to push them home. You're going to have to pull them home. Well, that means there needs to be substance and there needs to be joy, but playfulness is a key form of joy in that regard.
I don't know how each man's temperament is wired in this respect, but I know from experience that the strategy I'm investing in, let's put it that way. My oldest is 11, okay, so I don't know if this is gonna work. I'm hoping it works. But it worked with my dad. All his kids are still local. They all still come over to his and mom's house. It's the place where we feel like we have to be every few days because we have to touch base and get back together. And it's the magnetic center of the whole thing. And the strategy is you've got to love being with your kids. You have to cultivate a love within your own heart and life for being with your children. That has to be something that you get up in the morning and you say, golly, I cannot wait to spend time with my kids today. I cannot wait to go outside with them. I can't wait to wrestle with them. I can't wait to joke with them, to read with them. And that needs to become a thing that you just thirst for as a father. And for me, that comes very naturally because it's an example that's been set by my dad, and he did all that. It won't come naturally for many people precisely because it wasn't modeled for them, but you can cultivate it. You can become the kind of father who truly enjoys that. And kids aren't stupid. Kids are incredibly perceptive, like almost magically sharp creatures. They can see what's really going on in your mind, and they can tell when you're doing something out of duty and obligation and when you're doing something because you really are 100% invested in it. Just like you wouldn't try to love your wife out of just pure duty if you think something was wrong after a while. If you kept being like that, you can't do that with your kids. You actually have to be there yourself, and they'll pick up on that.
You see this modeled in God the Father, in his son, Jesus. I mean, he shows up, and he just shows up to say, this is my son. Y'all, this is my son. He just delights in him. That is the central motif of seeing what the Heavenly Father is like. He delights in his kids. And Shane's exactly right, and I would say there's a difference between really delighting in your kids and delighting in the idea of delighting in your kids. And your kids can smell the difference. Because it's easy to have you go to a conference or you read a book or you hear a sermon, and then you have this, you can actually create a graven image in your head of what a happy family must be like. But now, rather than looking to the Father and then delighting in your own family, the family that God's actually given you, you can actually start serving this image, which can be really, idolatry is always self-defeating, but it's really frustrating. But my oldest is about to turn 20, and he's about to get married. And then I have 2 high school daughters and then a middle school son. And so the 3 olders are all sort of in high school, college, and just going here and there and doing all the things that normal kids do. But it's been an enormous delight to see. They're not required. At a certain point in high school, I just tell them, do as you please. Love Jesus and have fun. And they're welcome to be home at dinner. They're welcome to go with their friends. They have jobs. They have school. They have homework, and I just trust them as young adults to do what they need to do. But it's incredibly gratifying to see how often they're home. And I'm not telling them they have to be, but it's the gravity thing. They want to be home. They bring their friends home, their kids, not yet. Hopefully soon. But their friends, and so it's not at all, it's a very open-handed thing. But the short answer I would say to piggyback on the whole question would be start now. So delight in them now. Have a happy dinner time now. Have a happy evenings with them now. Not grasping and demanding, but you want it to be the kind of thing that is just sort of naturally bubbles over. Conversation, stories, jokes, laughter. And then all of a sudden you look up and say, oh no, Dad, I've got homework. Okay, see ya.
Practicals on that would be when the younger they are, right? You're gonna do tickle fights, big deal. God's in favor. So tickle fights with your kids when they're younger. As they get older, they're boys. It's gonna turn into more wrestle fights. So sometimes you can feel this, like when you feel like there's just some grumpiness or just kind of stuff like that. If you have a boy, one of the things that I do if he's sullen is I go start to push him. Like in that, just kind of, all right, let's see, what are you gonna do now? And start messing, and you can just see all of a sudden it kind of works its way out. I don't have daughters, but if you have daughters, I'm reliably told that fathers Doug talks about with his daughters just regularly just kind of walking up and just reassuring hug, just no reason, just hug. So parental affection in those really tangible, tactile ways actually really matters. It's like I have a friend who talks about even, a mother, cradling her child is sowing shalom into the nervous system, right? Like that's what you're doing. And then you're doing that with the tickle fights and the reassuring hugs and the wrestle fights as they get older and the really creative fort building when they're about 6 and you build some crazy thing to hide from mom and all of those sort of things. Dads excel at that, and then moms have their own way, right? To do the same sorts of relational building, the conversations and the meals, right? All of that sort of stuff, feeding your people, are all really tangible ways that you can create gravity.
I'd say 9 times out of 10, my observation of someone who doesn't delight in their kids, they're also not excelling in discipline. They're letting things bubble up, go over. They're overwhelming. The kids don't know how to interact appropriately, or hold it closer. There we go. Thank you. They let things kind of bubble underneath until they explode. Or the kids are just annoying. Yeah, we have this phrase.
You can say that. Kids are annoying sometimes.
Yes,
they know it.
We have this phrase around our house. We say this frequently. Hey, buddy, I have, my oldest is 13, but I have 6 kids, 4 boys and 2 girls. One's a 6-month-old. We have this phrase. We got it from someone else. I can't remember who, but buddy, what you're doing right now is not sin, but if you keep doing it, you're not going to have any friends. Right?
Amen.
This is one of Jordan Peterson's rules for life in his first book, is don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them, because you're the person who has the greatest bias in their favor in the world. So if you let them grow up to be obnoxious monsters and they go out into the world that way, everyone will hate them. So save them that misery and don't let them be annoying.
So tell them when they don't know how to sing, right?
That's great. Yeah, and Pastor Joe, to your point, my oldest son, 10 years old, chipped his tooth a year ago wrestling. Best night of his life. Loved it. Yeah, boys love wrestling. Okay, so if grumpiness, anger, irritability is the biggest ditch for dads to fall into, what's the biggest, where the kids will not want to be around dad down the road? What's the biggest ditch for moms?
Fear. Okay, so moms, I think, moms are paying really close attention to the kids, sometimes in ways that dads aren't. Dad's oriented outside the home, provide, protect, etc. Mom's there more, she's more oriented relationally. This is the gendered virtue sort of stuff, right? So she's seeing stuff, and so she sees sin and rebellion in the kids in seed form, and then her imagination gets going, and she's like, when that tree grows up, it's going to be really bad. And now her emotions are reacting to the 20-year-old version of that unchecked. And so now there's a lot of fear that's kind of got her by the throat, and now she's going to try to address it, not out of love, joy, delight, trusting in God, but out of fear, and therefore it won't go well. It just because he's not going to bless that. He's not going to bless parenting out of fear. And so this is where trusting God with your kids, believing the promises of God for your kids, taking responsibility for the kids is core, and so you're parenting out of faith that God's got them. God's got them. That's why you're there. He put them in your household, and said, especially when our kids were young, if my wife would see something and I could tell it was kind of getting up there, right, starting to go here. Oh, but if it stays like this, it's going to be like that, and it's going to be like that. I'm like, I know. That's why we're here. That's what's God going to do about this? He's like, He's stuck us here. This is what we're for. This is the entire reason. There's immaturity. There's sin. Yes, it's all baked into the cake, and it's our job to address it. God has chosen a means to address this, and so let's trust Him and then lean it.
Pastor Michael, you don't look it, but you're 50 years old. No. So you will be 50? Did you not turn 50? All right, sorry.
Watch it.
Okay. So remember how men are aggressive, right? All right. So you're a few years further down the road than most of us, or a good portion of us here. Any tips for as the kids enter those teenage years, 12, 14, 16, 18, and you start having to kind of let go a little bit, like you were saying, Pastor Toby, like they've got jobs, they've got cars, they've got school responsibilities, how to stay invested, how to stay engaged, how to keep making deposits as you sort of take the hands off the wheel?
Yeah, I've heard somebody describe parenting as just a long, continual process of letting go, because eventually you have to let them go, and you're having to decide the moments, so that way it's not high control until you're 18, and then you do what you want, or you're gone. And so I just try to do the dimmer switch. And it's always a give and take. It's going to be different for each child. Some of I have all my kids have obviously different personalities. Some need a more firm, direct correction. I have one kid. The joke around our house is like, for you, the rule isn't a rule until I tell it to you. The only rules that operate in your mind are the rules that I enforce. And so if I say, hey, be home at 9. And it shows up at 9:30, and I don't say anything, it's like, okay, then that's not a rule. And so it's like I'm always having to enforce the rule, always, and it's exhausting. And I tell them, like, it is exhausting.
This is why you can go 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, because it's
exactly
not enforced. Is it enforced here? I don't know. Okay.
In this neighborhood, no. In this exact neighborhood, they do not enforce traffic moving violations. I'm serious. Stop signs. Nothing matters in this neighborhood. I know
immigration laws.
Welcome to Thunderdome, right?
I hope my kids do not follow my lead on my driving. But I've had one child total a car already, and another one 2 fender benders. So I'm not such a great track record there. But I digress. But it's going to be you have to be on the dimmer switch from controlled influence. And as the kids get older, I'm just like, okay, like my daughter's now in college, my oldest. And so I know explicitly what I'm aiming at for her is influence. I know that there is a father card that I can play. And that if there is a time to put my foot down, no, sweetheart, that's not what's going to happen. Here's what we're going to do. I can play that card, but I don't want to play that card too often because I want her to understand freedom and to be able to have some liberty to make some mistakes, and then I can weigh in as needed with feedback, real-time feedback. My youngest, Judah, hello Judah. with him, it's more directive because he's the youngest, and that is always a judgment call that we're making in real time. And I do this because we can't be too proud to ask for help. Wade's oldest is the same age as my youngest. And there have been several times, I remember one time a few months ago, with my oldest son, I did not understand a situation. And because I misunderstood the situation, I said a firm no, you're not going to do that. Not knowing he had already made some plans, and so I put my foot down. And then my wife tells me, it's like, well, did you not know that he had already made these plans with these people and you just told him no? And I was like, okay, I want my yes to be yes and my no to be no. I don't want to be the weak father that just caves in because it pulls my heartstrings. I'm like, he's a kid. I want him to have fun, And so I go to Wade and I'm like, all right, Wade, here's the situation. And what do you think? What do you think I should do? And in that situation, Wade said, you ought to go back and change, adjust what you said. And so I did. And so what I did is, I live 5 minutes from here. So I drove home, and he had been upset. I could tell when I walked in the house, all of his plans for the day were ruined, and he was upset. And I walk in the house, and I'm like, listen, son, I love you. I want you to have fun. I want you to enjoy your friends. And I did not understand the situation. Based on new intel, I'm going to relinquish my former directive, and you can go now. And what I recognized in that moment, and I was thankful that Wade gave me that counsel, as I was like, okay, that's a tent peg moment that we now share, where he was like, Dad heard me, he understood me, Dad cared in that moment. And that was by choosing to forego a directive for his sake, I was able to make a deposit in future influence. And those are the negotiations we're making all the time, especially as they get older. And for people that have older children, grown children, they'll tell me, they said it doesn't get any easier. It's like when your kids are grown, the problems are more complicated and you have less control and you can't fix it. So I'm like, I want to invest. I want to make deposits on future influence that I may have to cash in someday and say, okay, I'm pushing all my chips on the table. You are making an incredibly foolish decision, and with all my heart, don't do that. When they're 25 or something, I might have to do that. But it is a negotiation, and over time, that's the challenge.
So, one thing we talk a lot about in Moscow, talk about like that 13 to 16 range where you're starting to pull some reins off, but it's also like the most difficult. I mean, puberty's happening, everything's going nuts internally, and all of a sudden the sweet little kid that you used to know went someplace else for a couple of years. And you're having to sort of, you know what I mean? Like there's that window of time that's not good, but like for parents, like window of time meaning the kids there's more going on. It was simpler whenever they were 8 and they were 9 and they were 10. And then all of a sudden they hit that window. So I know I've talked to Doug about this in the hey, this is the bumpiest part when kids are there. And how do you encourage parents in that bumpy?
Yeah, I don't know if this is exactly what you're thinking of, but the thing that I was thinking of is I think in the early teen years, 12 to 14-ish in there, the thing that I tell parents to work on a lot is try to build, think of that as a key investment time for building the relationship stronger outside of the flashpoints. So there's going to be decisions that have to be made all week long, which may or may not be easy to make. And can you go do the thing that you want to do? That's got to be made. But frequently, life gets busy, and you can go 6 months down the road, and all of a sudden you realize basically all the interaction you've had with them has been at flashpoints, which means it's just at the point all you're doing is writing checks, but you're not actually making a lot of deposits. And so so what I've done with my kids, and I encourage parents to do is, especially dads, is make a point to have one-on-one time with each of your kids regularly, that's a lot. I mean, and more kids you have, the more it is. But so for a number of years, I just had one day a week that was my lunch with the kids day, and I just rotated through all the kids. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and things would come up, and you'd have to reschedule or whatever. But I just had it on the calendar as a set schedule, and the goal of that hour is entirely to just connect. So it's not not an agenda. Like I'm not coming in with, and now for the next lesson, son. It's all just, hey, how's your day? How's your week? Who are you hanging out with? Anything crazy at school going on? And obviously, if things are going on at home or there are other things that we're working on, I can say, hey, how's that going? And any questions about anything? And but it's just face time with dad, just connection time. Because the very thing that you were able to accomplish in that one moment through the advice that Wade gave and stuff of, oh, my dad is understanding, my dad is reasonable, all that kind of thing. You actually want, as possible, you want to try to do that every week. Like, regularly just, hey, how's it going? So it's not when he's just in trouble, not just when a lot's on the line, but just regularly, hey, how's it going? What do you think about this? And it's just low stakes hangout time. And sometimes, guys, sometimes we don't have a lot to say to each other. This is strange for women, I know, but I would just sit there and eat McDonald's in my truck and, hey, how's your day? Pretty good, good. How about the Mariners? Yeah,
They're no good.
Don't have to rub it in. But don't underestimate that kind of, that's quality time. And that goes back to the presence thing that Joe was saying earlier. The key thing for a father is just to be there. And then as you do that, you're investing. One last thing too is, one of the things when our kids were really young, so up to 6 or 7, maybe 8-ish, basically the thing that we really worked on was just immediate, cheerful obedience. So just immediate, cheerful obedience. We call it a benevolent totalitarian dictatorship. And we wanted it to be a very, very happy place in which we ran their lives. Right, so stories and games and laughter and tickle fights and all the rest of it. So it's a happy place. And
It's like North Korea, but happy.
yeah, but a very happy North Korean. And but then somewhere around 9, 10, 11, as they're kind of going into that pert stage, and so on, what we would switch to is they would have thoughts or they would want to explain something to you, but what the temptation is to start lawyering you, especially your wife, right? So I had to give instructions to my wife. You don't debate anything, especially with the boys. No debates. But what we would do is we would give them permission to say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, may I ask you a question? So there was a respectful way of asking for, can I ask a question? Could I explain something to you? And of course, depending on the situation, sometimes you say, sorry, I don't have time for that right now. No, not right now, maybe later. And they needed to cheerfully obey that. But lots of times there is a moment for, oh, sure, yeah, what was your question? And they say, well, actually, I've been making these plans for the last 6 months, and or whatever, or you misunderstood part of the story. Oh, okay, thanks for that. Or, okay, but that doesn't change anything. Do it anyways. But giving them the language with which they can make an appeal is showing them respect and honor, and so on. One other thing this reminds me of arguing with mom. There were some things where I would just say, Jenny, my wife, if it looks like it's an argument, just tell them they can talk to me. And so she would say, oh, your dad said you can talk to him about that. So it was reasonable. There was not tension. It wasn't like we were upset about it. There was a reasonable appeal process. But I really didn't want my wife to have to be the one who had to argue. And then in a few specific areas, at various points, I did this with my older son, I think probably when he was about 13. One of the things that periodically is a thing between sons and moms is what the sons are eating, and maybe particularly the lack of greens in the diet. And so around 13, I was just here and there, it was just a little thing, but I just decided I just didn't want that to be a thing. Of all the things that Matt, who cares? He's gonna figure it out or not, or whatever. So I just, one day, it occurred to me, and so I told my wife, you know what, he's 13 now. From now on, I don't want you to say anything to him at all about what he eats. No more. You did that for 13 years, good job. All done. And then I went to my son and I told him, I said, I told your mom she's not to tell you anything more about what you eat. So you're free, and I want you to honor your mom. And looking back, is one of those things it wasn't not heavily premeditated at all. I just saw it and I was like, I don't want there to be a thing there. I want them to be friends. And so that's what I did. And it's been one of the best things I ever did. And he still doesn't eat salad.
Worked perfectly. The statistics I've seen on household gun violence, in other words, a kid finding a gun and accidentally or intentionally using it to hurt someone or kill someone or whatever, indicate that it happens predominantly in the houses where the gun is locked up. It's a secret. It's a sort of like holy grail. It's out of sight, out of mind, and the kid finds it, right? The kid desires it. It's the forbidden fruit, right? Got to check that out. The houses out, in the rural parts of the country,
Idaho,
where there's a gun on the mantle, right over the fireplace, and at whatever young age, like 10, 11, 12, you take it down, you show the boys, usually the boys, but the girls too, how it works, what it is, the fact that it can kill people. And I just did this with my sons. I started with a little 22 Winchester, so we're starting small. But I showed them what this is, and I said, all right, we're going to take it to Lolly and Pops' house next month, and we're gonna let you shoot this because it doesn't have any recoil. It's a pretty easy starter gun, and that takes the mystery out of it. And it also, you can see in my boys' eyes this sense that, oh, Dad's letting me in on the secret. I'm being given the responsibility to be a kind of person who knows where the gun is, what it does, and roughly how it works, right? And that, it turns out, that's kind of the recipe for not having problems with guns in your house. Same thing applies to just about every responsibility that I think kids assume as they get older. It's the vegetable thing, it's the driving thing. In Abigail Schreier's new book, the one about bad therapy, she talks about how she had to let her daughter walk to the grocery store to get whatever she requested from the store. And it just pained her, it just killed her to send her kid out to walk on the busy street and cross the crosswalks and walk on the sidewalk to go get the things. And it turned out, she was all worried about nothing. Everything went fine. And her daughter began to richly enjoy this experience and to think, I am trusted. I am loved and trusted and invested in enough by my mom that she lets me do this. And therefore, I'm going to do the best job I possibly can, best darn job I can. And that's what you see again and again and again. When you cultivate that sense of trust in your kids, and then they get that sense that I am being given the trust and the freedom to actually screw up if I want to. That's all the more reason not to screw up. I worked for this, I interned for this organization in DC called Leadership Institute. It was founded by this guy who was part of the Barry Goldwater campaign back in the day, and he's been a conservative political operative behind the scenes and everything since. I mean, he's 150, not really, he's 80, but Morton Blackwell. But he has this thing that he gives every intern and student there. It's called the Rules of the Public Policy Process, and it's how to run a campaign, basically. And one of the things on there is give them a title and give them a job. And the rationale behind that is when you appoint someone to, executive manager of whatever, right, assistant branch manager or something, you are, there we go, somebody got it. You're evincing that trust in them that they need to feel. So now they think, I'm official. I am the assistant whatever to the whatever, I'm going to do a good job. It's just part of human psychology, male, female, everyone. And it starts as you're growing up. The worst thing you can possibly do is censorious and feel like, make your kids feel like, oh, I am under a bunch of restrictions and heavy-handed rules. I'm not trusted. Then they're definitely going to rebel.
It probably won't come as a surprise that there's a 20 gauge hanging over my 12-year-old son's bed.
Last one. In a post-Genesis 3 world, there's barrenness. There's men who are in their 30s and want to get married but can't find a godly woman. Women who are in their 30s and can't find a godly man. There are men and women who are here or who will listen who have not been able to have children for one reason or another. We're all called to be patriarchs and matriarchs in some sense. How do they do it?
I think it's the beauty of the church. It's the beauty of, we at CTL, we try to really prize other men and their input into my kids. I don't want to be the only patriarch speaking into my boys' lives, whether that's a patriarch who has a household full of kids or or it's by him by himself. Like, he has a valuable place. If he's following the Lord, he's trusting the scriptures, he's part of the community, then he has a valuable part. And I want to prize that and not squash that. Same thing on the ladies' side.
My family is just packed with adoption. So I have 2 adopted sister-in-laws. My sister and my brother-in-law, so her husband, just adopted 2 kids. And my dad, so the patriarch who set up this magnetic home, right? He is adopted because his parents at first couldn't conceive, but then they did that thing that everyone seems to do, where they had a kid after they adopted. But this was back in the 60s, and so the process that happens there. I mean, I know it sounds cliche, like adopt. If you can't have kids, adopt. Let me say, with all seriousness, this is one of the most redemptive, beautiful, powerful, and effective means of building a legacy that is available to us. And yes, it's screwed up, and yes, it's difficult, and yes, our government makes it a pain in the rear to do. I watched my sister and my brother-in-law just suffer through this for like 2 years of difficulty. Whether are they going to stay or are they not going to stay? And the kids are in their house the whole time. I'm not denying that it's difficult, but it is an incredibly redemptive and beautiful thing, and I will just put in that plug for adoption because it's something that Christians we do a lot of, it turns out, but we should do more of it.
Yeah, same thoughts between both those. The church itself is a wonderful place where, the Lord is good and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's always right on time. And so if he's called you to be single right now, then he has called you to be single in this place at this time to serve his people as a patriarch, as a matriarch, as a father, an extended father, as a mother, as an extended mother, practicing hospitality and nurture and so forth. And at the end of Romans, one of the people, it's where Paul has that miscellaneous list of all the people. Say hi to Fred and Jim and Jane. And he says, and make sure you say hi to Rufus's mother, because she too has been a mother to me. And so, there's this woman in Rome who I'm guessing had probably housed and fed Paul. And so that's biblical motherhood there. And then also, I've got 2 siblings who are not able to have their own biological children. My brother and his wife have adopted 2. And my sister and her husband aren't able to have their own children, and they're in the process of adopting. And then my wife and I, we did foster care for about 6 years, never adopted any of those children. But there are, in the church and outside of the church, multiple opportunities to practice fatherhood and motherhood. And it's really needed, and it's an enormous gift to the world.
To add one more thought on this. There's the biological fact of fatherhood or motherhood, and then there are the vocations of fatherhood and motherhood that can be abstracted from the biological reality. So Rufus's mother is an example. She was a mother to Paul, but not a biological mother, just as Paul was a spiritual father to Timothy and so forth. So for just as I talked about earlier tonight, the image of God includes some kind of dynasty, some reproduction, fatherhood, motherhood, which is the telos, the end, the purpose for which manhood and womanhood were created. And so there's the biological fact of that, but then there's also the vocation that corresponds to that, and it'll be somewhat different to men and women. But what I counsel people that are single or do not have children is you don't start pursuing the virtues of fatherhood the day you have a child in your arms. You don't start pursuing the virtues of being a good husband the day you get married. You begin in anticipation of it. So you want to be the kind of man who would be a good husband, which will attract the kind of woman that would want to marry you. Same thing goes with being father and mother. So there are vocations that we should pursue regardless of our biological or marital station, but we pursue the virtues that are represented by those 2 vocations. I can give you a couple of examples. There's a couple in our church, man and woman, that do not have biological children and were unable to. And so they chose to invest in a ministry to international students. And they have led, I don't know how many dozens, easily dozens of people to faith. And there's all kinds of Chinese people on any given Sunday that know them as mom and dad. And like one of them is a man that I think would be, maybe by God's grace, could be an elder someday at our church but he was led to the faith through this couple, a decade ago. Another example, I think he's in this room. There he is, Dan. Dan Monahan he is a father to so many young men in our church. Dan has his own children, but Dan also has a group of men that he meets with weekly, monthly, takes them out to pray, sends them emails. He gives them assignments of who to pray for, gives them things to meditate on, and he is a father to them, not in the sense that he's a kindly older fella, but he is reproducing his life in them. He is passing on, he is creating life in them. And I don't mean to embarrass you, Dan, but it's like you're a blessing to the church as a father to a lot of men in this church, and that is a vocation to pursue. And that vocation is available to any man or woman, regardless of your marital status or if you have children.
Amen. Let's give a show of appreciation to these men.